The French campaign in Egypt was a military expedition by the Republic of France against the Ottoman Empire, several Principality of Egypt Mamluks, and the British Empire. The campaign was instigated by Napoleon Bonaparte's desire to defend French trade interests in Ottoman-controlled Egypt, and was also encouraged by the fact that Egypt's population was going through a severe drought at the time. In May 1798, a French fleet commanded by Napoleon arrived in Egypt and began landing troops in Egypt. The French quickly captured the Egyptian capital of Cairo, and within a few months had control over much of the country. The British, who were supporting the Ottomans, responded by sending a fleet to Egypt, which arrived in August 1798. The two fleets fought a major battle at the Battle of the Nile, in which the British were victorious. The French were forced to retreat, and Napoleon eventually left Egypt and returned to France. On April 25, 1798, a French expeditionary force of some 25,000 men under the command of General Napoleon Bonaparte sails from Toulon. The objective of the campaign was to gain control of Egypt, which was a strategic key to the British Empire at the time. The British had been using Egypt as a base to attack French shipping in the Mediterranean, and Napoleon saw this as an opportunity to strike a blow against his enemies. The French force was met by a much larger Egyptian army, but through a combination of brave fighting and clever strategy, the French were able to gain the upper hand. On July 21st, they captured the Egyptian capital of Cairo. This was a major victory for the French, and it gave them a firm foothold in the region. The British were not about to give up easily, however. They quickly dispatched a large expeditionary force to Egypt, and in early 1801, they began a series of attacks on the French positions. After a series of bloody battles, the British were ultimately victorious, and they forced the French to abandon Egypt. The French campaign in Egypt was a significant event in the history of the Napoleonic Wars. It was the first time that Napoleon had been defeated in battle, and it was a major setback for French plans to gain control of the British Empire. The French campaign in Egypt was a military expedition by the Republic of France to conquer Egypt and settle the debts of the Ottoman Empire. It began on April 30th, 1798, when they landed at Alexandria. The campaign was an attempt to undermine British power in the Mediterranean and to spread the ideals of the French Revolution to Egypt and the Ottoman Empire. The French also hoped that by conquering Egypt, they would be able to control the Suez Canal and the Red Sea trade routes. During the campaign, the French faced stiff resistance from the British, who were defending their interests in the region. The French also faced a difficult climate, with diseases such as malaria and typhus taking a toll on their troops. Despite these challenges, the French were able to make significant gains. They captured Cairo in July 1798, and declared a protectorate over Egypt. However, the British were able to drive the French out of Egypt in 1801. On May 2, 1798, the French captured Cairo from the Mamluks. This was a significant victory for the French, as it allowed them to control Egypt and its strategic waterways. The Mamluks had been ruling Egypt since the 13th century, but they were no match for the French army. The capture of Cairo allowed the French to consolidate their power in Egypt and solidify their position as a major player in the region. In 1798, the French army under the command of Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt. They were met with little resistance and easily took control of the country. In June of that year, they defeated an Ottoman army at the Battle of the Pyramids. This victory was a boost to French morale and helped to solidify their control of Egypt. The Ottomans, on the other hand, were dealt a major setback. This battle was one of the first successes of the French campaign in Egypt. On July 1st, the French forces began their occupation of Alexandria after defeating the Mamluk forces in the Battle of the Pyramids. This was a major victory for the French, as it allowed them to take control of one of the major maritime ports in Egypt and gain a foothold in the country. The French campaign in Egypt was part of Napoleon's broader plan to try and destabilize the British Empire by cutting off its access to important trade routes and resources. In addition to taking Alexandria, the French also occupied the city of Cairo. However, the British soon defeated the French in Egypt at the Battle of the Nile in August 1798. This ended Napoleon's attempt to gain a foothold in Egypt and forced him to retreat back to France. Napoleon's army suffered from disease, and he faced a growing rebellion among the Egyptian people. By 1799, Napoleon's army was suffering from disease and going through food and supplies quickly. There was also a growing rebellion among the Egyptian people. Napoleon had to leave his men and return to France, which put a stop to his plans to conquer Egypt. On August 22nd, the French army began its withdrawal from Egypt, marking the end of the French campaign in Egypt. The withdrawal was precipitated by a series of defeats at the hands of the British, who had taken control of Egypt in 1882. The French had hoped to establish a foothold in Egypt, but the British presence made that impossible. The withdrawal was a humiliating defeat for the French, and it signaled the end of their ambitions in Egypt. The French campaign on Egypt was a resounding success. The French were able to take control of Egypt and establish a new government. This new government was able to bring stability to the region and improve the lives of the people. The campaign was a great success for the French and helped to cement their place as a major power in the world.